It's not letting me.
All right.
There you go.
Hi,
Yeah,
I'd like
there you
to
go.
call the meeting to
Thank
order. Should I do a roll call? Would that help, or does everybody know everybody? So you want to start again, Jen?
Sally Brooks.
Sally.
Yeah,
Sally.
you're good, Nick.
Yeah.
Scott Curtis. Josh Burrow. Kyle James.
Stuart Weinberg.
Joe Boykin.
Great. I consider that we took care of all the things we need to take care of to comply with the.
Yes.
Act.
Yes.
All right, and I just, I'm turning it over to Ariel or Karen.
We're just to do the minutes.
Okay.
first.
Oh,
We're gonna do it on the minutes.
that's not on the agenda, but you just,
Yeah.
you need to put that on the agenda.
Yeah, we'll
sorry.
put it on.
All right. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of our March meeting? Thank you, Kyle. I need a second.
Second.
Any questions, concerns, issues? If none, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Great, pass. Thank you. You're on.
Okay, so now we're going to do a presentation for the resilience ordinance recommendation process. Joel, Evans, and Andrea.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're going to follow that.
Naomi, do you mind sharing that PowerPoint that's up?
Yes.
Sorry, where can I find the PowerPoint?
Can you see it at the bottom right here? Or you can't?
There you go.
No. Is there? I can make you the host again though, Ariel, and
If you
then
could do that, that would be helpful.
you can give it back to me when it's
Yeah,
I'm
that
up.
sounds good.
There you go.
Perfect, thank you. Just move that box out of your way. Here's the mouse.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Evans. I'm the planning director for Charleston County, and Andrew Melisek, the deputy director, will also be helping with this presentation. This is a short presentation of information that we have based on the resilience committee that was once a part of a subcommittee of planning commission. That committee has done their duty. They recommended actually the resilience element itself and the comp plan prior to it being required by state law. And then we use that same committee to start addressing ordinance changes. But now that the resilience committee has been formally formed by council, these are just things that we wanted to let you know had already been done, and things that might be looking for. All right, and what I just said, I think is up there. So I won't read through that, but those are actually the time frames for when the resilience committee was last created, and then this one as well. So the presentation that we have, we're going to show some things that had come out of that committee that were already addressed in the ordinance, and some things that we have since actually adopted, and things that have not been adopted, but things that should be considered. So things that are already addressed. Things like
Can anyone make that a little larger?
I can't.
That's better. Everybody agree?
Is that,
Yeah. All right, thank
Is
you.
that doable?
Yeah.
And we can share the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
So these are, again, are things that came out of the committee, but after we reviewed them, we already addressed these items. Things like requiring parking areas designed to be separated by normal use areas, and having the capacity for overflow parking. We have that. In fact, we have a 10% reduction in parking requirements. And also too, we have a impervious surface requirement as well. So if you go over a certain number of paid parking spaces by ordinance, those additional spaces have to be impervious. We retain natural buffers along right of ways. That was something that we pulled out after some folks said we need to strengthen the tree ordinance, require natural buffers, and both in the plan development process and in the ordinance itself, which is general commercial development or non-residential development. There are buffer requirements. Parking reductions, reductions in required parking in are there for affordable housing within 1,200 feet of CARTA, Tri-County Lane, or LCRT stops. And stop development of wetlands and density and lot development requirements. Freshwater wetlands acreage is no longer calculated in density for development subdivisions. So that's something that I think was very important that came out of the last Zeldar update that we did.
Jill, do you mind if we interrupt at any point and ask questions?
Sure.
Okay, so I have one. Is there any examples of the parking changes that said that any additional parking has to be impervious, not impervious? Any examples that already exist that you know of?
We have several developments that have done that, and normally what they'll choose to do is to require that they'll choose to have parking spaces above the maximum required pave, and they'll just have gravel in those spots.
Okay.
And sometimes they'll go the extra mile and do the pervious pavers, or depending on what the use is, it could even be grass. So say the rural areas, like churches that aren't traveling a lot, we've done that before too. But normally it's gravel, is what people will choose to do. But it's got to be a certain type of gravel to do that. Of course, if you get into the engineering of it, you can't use the ROC type of gravel that when it gets wet, it compacts and almost gets like concrete. It's got to be that single size stone that will allow the water.
Joel, I was over at Fishing Gas, I think last year, and they're using pervious concrete in some of the spaces, which I had not seen until I saw it there.
Yes, there's pervious asphalt and there's pervious concrete.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, those have been around for a while, especially the pervious concrete. I think there's depending on what the use is and how it will be traveled by vehicles, I think that the pedestrian cars can withstand that pervious concrete because of the compaction, but I think they're still trying to figure out in industrial uses if the trucks are going to tear it up or not. Yeah. But it is very successful from what I understand. And there have been I've seen the experiments where they take a fire hose out on the pervious concrete parking lot, and there's just zero runoff. It doesn't matter how much water.
That's pretty amazing.
Is there any discussion when you're going through the parking minimums about parking maximums, at least in the most dense urban areas near transit stops?
Well, we have a parking reduction for those for affordable housing when they're in those within a certain proximity. What that reduction is, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's goes down to zero. Because every use we have in the ordinance has a parking requirement, even single family detached residential. But the idea being that if you live near some sort of public transportation, that some folks who, especially in affordable housing units, may choose not to even have a car and to use the public transportation. And of course, that's nothing new really in big cities. People choose to do that all the time. I walk to DC and New York and Boston. Those areas that have a lot of public transportation. We're just now starting to get that.
Well, we just need more public transportation. And we might get there. So sorry.
Yeah, but I guess the idea of a parking maximum kind of creates an incentive, or I guess a disincentive with a lack of availability.
I think that's really handled. I work with Joel and Andrea. So, we have an impervious maximum, and a lot of this is really filtered through our public works stormwater division and how they capture and retain and treat any of the stormwater runoff. I think from my perspective, what would be beneficial, not just talking about parking spaces and the number of parking spaces, is actually how it's designed, the parking lots and things to address, whether it's curbing or not curbing, it's a way we could take it maybe a little further than
Right, there
just
are trends
addressing the
now
number of
in the
spaces.
parking areas. It's having inverted islands rather than raised islands, and the idea being that the water that does go in, that is runoff from a parking lot, no matter what the surface is, would get infiltrated into trenches
Yeah,
instead of just going to the stormwater system.
like bioswales that
Yeah.
connect and islands that are inverted to sort of, but
All right, so these are short-term amendments that were adopted in 2022, so somewhat just recently. One of the committee recommendations was to encourage parking under buildings. So we did that. And we did that by not penalizing a homeowner for the height requirement if they choose to have their parking area under the house. Now, in some cases, if you're in a flood zone, of course, the homeowner will do that anyway, because the house has to be elevated. But with this scenario, this actually, a homeowner can do it and not get penalized for the height, even if they're not in a flood zone. And the idea being that you're double dutying the rooftop of the house so that it's also acting as the parking area, so that you don't have an additional impervious area for the parking area, especially on smaller lots. Right? So that's not it. And then to sort of get into the weed zone, we defined the story because we're allowing it to go up one story. We made a definition of story. Number two, incentivize the use of local and natural or more sustainable landscaping and hardscaping by developers. Less open lawns and more rain gardens, more pervious surfaces. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Let's see. So this is the one that that was somewhat controversial. It took a lot of work to get through to educate folks on how this worked, but what we spent a lot of time doing is figuring out, and the previous to this ordinance, I'm going to try to describe a little better, especially in single family detached zoning districts, there was no impervious coverage requirement at all. There was a building coverage requirement. So we had a 35% building coverage requirement for a home on a lot. And as far as permitting goes for impervious purposes, we did not get into patios, driveways, any other paved surface that went along with that. You can theoretically, before the adoption of this ordinance, pave right to the edge of your property line. Okay, and unfortunately, there were actually a couple of examples that we were found. The one that we presented to county council was actually one in the city, but it still could have happened in Charleston County. Where was a smaller lot? The person built their house, but they had a couple of RVs, I think, and a couple of other things. So they just paved their whole yard, and it ran off into the neighbor's yard. So that's sort of the extreme example of what we're trying to avoid by adopting this ordinance, which was adopted. So now we have gone to we've done away with the maximum building coverage and gone with a maximum impervious coverage. So now when a site plan is submitted for approval for a residential home, the homeowner or builder has to show where the driveways are, what they're made of, sidewalks, if they're gonna have a pool or not, patios, all of the things that the site improvements, not just the home. And so far we're working through the kinks on it, but so far it's working. The way the ordinance is written is that in the rural areas, which is mostly the parcels 30,000 square feet or more, this ordinance would not apply because if you've got a lot that's that size, it would be almost impossible. I want to say completely impossible, but it'd be almost impossible to go beyond 40%. Most of the lots in the rural areas are much greater than 30,000. 30,000 is the minimum lot area, but you'd have to have quite a sizable home and quite a sizable driveway and patios and everything to get close to that 40%. So this is mainly addressed to mainly written to address the urban areas where we see the most competitive flooding and the bigger issues of runoff. Right. So the way it's written is that 40% of the lot, you have to show that. There is a way around it, and Sally and I were talking about it a little earlier. If you want to go above that 40%, it has to be approved by the stormwater department. And they have techniques like these rain gardens, rain barrels that could be utilized to help offset that whatever percentages the homeowners proposing to go above that 40%. And it's working. They're doing that. It causes staff to really follow these carefully because now we are having to look at as time goes on, making sure as other additional permits are issued for the property, that 40% or whatever is approved by stormwater division is captured in the history of the property.
That was just the difference between the proposed and the adopted.
Okay.
And the only real difference was that what the committee had proposed and planning commission had recommended was for the non-residential districts to be capped at a 50% impervious coverage instead of the 70%, but that part didn't pass. Only the residential zoning district cap of 40% passed. Those were adopted in October of 22. So.
Incentivize the use of local, natural, and more sustainable landscaping, hardscaping by developers. Let's see. So a couple things we did in the update, almost clarifications, some of these, but prohibit the use of driveways or any other surface type located in a structural line buffer. And the overlay districts, we limited the overlay districts to correspond with the new building coverage and impervious coverage. So we had to go into each overlay because the overlays were adopted prior to, of course, 2022. So we went and kind of retrofitted them to meet these new development review procedure for in chapter 4 based zoning districts. We required applicants for variances for the maximum impervious coverage, including documentation showing how the proposed increase of impervious coverage beyond the maximum that allowed will be mitigated. We really don't foresee the way the ordinance is set up, which is really good. This ordinance required a sort of new conversation between planning and zoning and stormwater division, really, working together. Because the ordinance is written in a way that the stormwater division does have the ability for a property owner to go above that 40% if they're willing to do certain things. We don't foresee that folks should be really requesting variances for this because they would have to then want to go above or beyond what stormwater is requesting to go above. So they would have two departments, planning and zoning and stormwater saying, hey, it doesn't meet the ordinance. They would have to really show a pretty big hardship, to get a variance. Incentivize the use of local natural. Okay, I just talked about that. This is what was actually adopted. This is all about the impervious coverage. Discuss an increase in freeboard requirement in Charleston County building code. So we did discuss that, and I think it was something that the building director was at first proposing, but we we technically did not raise the flood elevation, but we defined base flood elevation better. So. Which one? You want to do the long range?
And in that building height definition, it used to be from base flood elevation, but we changed it to be from the design flood elevation to account for the freeboard. So, help folks out with that. So right now the freeboard is 2 feet. So instead of your base flood is here, you're not losing those 2 feet of elevation. And if that freeboard ever changes, then it's accounted for in your building height. So, and the last thing the previous committee had done was we've made some long range recommendations, and these were things that staff really felt needed more investigation into before taking them forward as amendments. Those. Sorry for the font size on this. We grouped them, you have parking. There was some discussion about parking caps, like we were talking about, Kyle. It didn't make it into their recommendation, but certainly something that we can look at again. And go in this category, we can look at it, research it some more. But they did look at, talk about incentivizing use of structured parking instead of surface parking, reducing the parking lot size by requiring shared parking, meaningful shared parking, requiring parking lots to be covered with either green roofs or with structures that have solar panels on them, and limiting on-street parking to one side of the street and new developments to reduce the overall impervious surfaces. For trees, they talked about strengthening the tree ordinance, preserving tree clusters instead of just the grand and protected trees like our ordinance currently does, and to strengthen the tree protection requirements for planned development. So we heard that through our public input process for our comprehensive plan review, which we're going through now. So that actually is included as a recommended work plan item in our comprehensive plan. So once that goes through the adoption process and it gets prioritized with all the other items in that work program, yeah, that's slated to be something that staff will work on in the zone department at that time. Elevation-based development, that was something that was discussed a lot. Undisturbed areas be more aggressive than 10% plus based on the elevation. So what we've done is we know that the city has hired a consultant and they're going through that process, and we plan to participate with them to learn as much as we can through that. And we have included a strategy in our comprehensive plan review to investigate the feasibility of this type of elevation-based zoning as well. So that's kind of the foot in the door for the zoning rights.
I'm sorry, which city again?
City of Charleston. And then related to that, incentivizing redevelopment of existing communities in lieu of new development where you would develop currently open space areas. And then some design standards. Incentivizing development of multiple level structures instead of one level to reduce the rooftop and total runoff of those structures. Incorporating sunken landscape islands in the middle of cul-de-sac turnarounds. Capping building footprints and allowing larger footprints if they have green roofs, so incentivizing those, and including incentives for rain gardens, tax credits, and those types of things. So these are all sort of things that are to be researched, and if you want to consider them as part of your recommendations as well, of course. And just note that these are the things that can be done on the zoning side of things. So there are other things for the building code, other things for the stormwater that we can all work together towards, since all of our ordinances really work together.
Is the, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Andrew, I was just going to ask, going back to the elevation-based zoning, that's going right after the whole practice building, right?
Yeah.
Does the county have the authority to change building codes? Because the city, we learned that that's a state.
Within the purview, as long as they don't go outside of what the state allows them to do.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
All
We
right.
talked about the energy code.
Yeah, and then, well, it's also some building codes that
Oh.
must be followed by what the state has, but.
Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
building codes that the building department has to follow.
Right.
But there are other things that the building department can do in addition to, like, for instance, Karen, do you want to describe Eric Keene's recent award for the points for flood?
Yeah, I don't know that the whole ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
I know some of it, not
So I
all.
don't know if y'all saw on the news that the building department was successful in getting the rating for the county's flood, FEMA flood
Right.
to a level 2, which is a huge deal. And it took a couple of years, several years of work for the building department. And they had to provide the documentation to FEMA to show, but that resulted in a discount of the flood insurance for everyone in unincorporated Charleston County, not in the other municipalities. But yeah, Hakeem was just recognized by council last week.
Joel, is there anything, either in current regulations or looking ahead to what might be proposed, that when these subdivision plans come in, is there any engineering or anything done to recognize natural floodplains that exist, that when they go in there and they raise the base elevation with fill, that now that's obstructed and the water can't move to a natural outfall? You know, I don't know if that gets into stormwater management, but it seems like.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm sure that someone from stormwater could really elaborate a lot on that. But I've seen, just being around it, the short answer to your question is yes, they have to do that, but it's within certain parameters of their stormwater manual. So they work on certain number of year storm events, and it's 25, 100 and more. I don't know how they exactly apply that to development, but yes, they have. You got to show that you're handling your water. It's going to an outfall that is not going to be detrimental to someone downstream. And how you get there, that was just my little one sentence or one I know they do. How you get there though, and the other things that go with that. There were special protection areas within the county that allows the stormwater division to do more. So you might want to have someone from the stormwater department. I'm sure that could be a whole, almost a whole meeting session describing.
Yeah, and we'll be having building services and stormwater coming in and doing the same type of presentation. So everyone on the committee will know what was discussed before with the previous committee and what we can look forward to.
So, any other questions right now? So just a logistics question, I think, or organizational. So as Joel mentioned, this was the former Resilience Committee. That former Resilience Committee doesn't exist anymore, and that's now part of the Resilience Sustainability Advisory Committee. So all these long-range recommendations will come back to us, for us to sort of put a stamp of approval before they go to county council. Is that how?
Yes, they'll come back and we'll vet them and we'll discuss them and we'll see which ones we want to move forward to zoning and planning or building services or stormwater to consider taking on to council.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Can I make a plug for the comprehensive plan review?
Sure, yes.
So we're going through our comprehensive plan 5-year review, and we started this last year where we got with all the departments and got a lot of information. And so we have a resilience element that was adopted in 2020, and we are updating our energy element to include sustainability. So Ariel's helped us a lot with that, and Karen's helped us a lot with the resilience element. And that resilience element was a result of a whole different committee that met, and it includes stormwater and building code and zoning recommendations. So we're going through our public workshop process now. So, and it's the draft plan with all the proposed revisions is online. And I can send Karen the link to that. So you can go through, you can see all the information we're presenting at the workshops if you aren't able to come in person. And then you can actually go through the plan and provide comments as you read through it. And that would help us. And if you have any other ideas for things to include, but the support for a lot of these ideas that we talked about today are included in that. And I think that would be very helpful if you all could help us with that and help us get the word out for that as well.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. And I'll send that link out to everyone so they can see it. If you have any questions, just let me know, and then I can forward it on to Andrea and Joe.
Anybody
Yeah.
else? have any-
Anybody else have any questions for Andrea,
Yeah,
Joe?
a real quick one, and I'm not sure where this all lies. With the fill and build practice, one of the things that occurs is the welling of grand trees. And I didn't know if there's been any kind of research or studying that's been done as to the survivability of those trees over time. And then is the welling a way to circumvent, getting a variance to take the tree down or otherwise encroach upon the tree? It's almost like the fill is an encroachment in itself under the canopy. I didn't know if it's kind of like just delaying the inevitable tree's gonna die, or if anybody's done any research to see how these trees are done, where they've not had to get a variance to take the tree out.
Yeah, it's very on case by case basis, the ecology of the area and how close that welling is, how deep you do it, all plays into fact the species of the tree. Some trees adapt to changes better than others. The short answer to the question is, if you're going to well a tree, you need to get it out as far as possible as you possibly can, and not change the natural existing grade around it as much as possible. There are so many factors that go on, that go with it. You wouldn't want to, it's got to drain out. So you'd have to have drains in that well so that it doesn't flood the tree and the tree breathe. Yeah,
And I didn't know if that's something that needs to be looked at. I mean, I've seen some over on Johns Island that are well pretty close to the trunk. I mean, these are massive grand live oak trees. And again, I don't know how long that's gonna be sustainable. And is that something we need to look at as far as our regulations on how it's welled or how far around the canopy?
So
Those kinds of things.
yeah, our tree ordinance so far is pretty good. We haven't run into that. Maybe very few occasions where someone wants to go completely around a great tree with the land disturbance or with filling. But we have a minimum distance that you have to be from a tree for any kind of disturbance, whether you're filling or actually grading down. And if you go beyond that, you can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yeah, so along with these amendments, there was an amendment with some clarifications to the tree ordinance that did actually clarify and maybe beef it up a little bit as far as these minimum distances and minimum percentages. So I think that definitely helped as far as that situation. I mean, people still ask for that, but
yeah, but depending
it's
on
not
the
as-
species and the size of the tree, when you can mess with the groundwater table of a tree that has been feeding itself and used to the water table being a certain distance, and it has, put out all its roots where it wants to go for its life. If you change that water table, that tree can slowly die, and it may take years. Yeah. Thank you. There's so many factors that go on.
As we move forward, please feel free to ask questions, because sometimes you're hearing terminology that you might have no idea what anyone's talking about. So please interrupt at any point and say, could you describe that? Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we're gonna move on to climate action plan, and I'm going to turn it over to Naomi, who is remote, to go over a workbook she has made for all of you.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hi, hello from, it's early morning here on the west coast of Canada, but happy to be here. And Ariel, if you can make me the host, I'll be able to share my screen and walk through the workbook.
I did make you the host.
Oh, there you
to
go.
not show. Okay,
Okay, it's just me needing to still wake up today.
no worries.
All right, fantastic. Can you see the screen okay?
If you could move, are you able to move the, let me see if I can do it. Yeah, let me just move it here.
Okay.
Can you
thank
make it a
very
little bit larger? Thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of the word.
That works. All right. Fantastic. Well, since the last time we met and we went over a sort of quick overview of the climate action planning process, Ariel and I have been able to work on the engagement plan with feedback, including the people around the table here today, and of course, key stakeholders who participated in pre-engagement interviews to give us advice on how to shape a climate action plan for Charleston County that would make sure that we invite everyone to the table, to have the discussion and to properly localize the plan for the needs in particular of Charleston County. So one of the one of the needs that we identified was to make sure that RSAC members have adequate time to consider all of the inputs and information essentially that's generated in a climate action planning process. And sort of the needs would be even a bit outside of the scheduled meetings that you have, the 4 that you have in the calendar year. And we'd have sort of points along the way where we would still want your feedback even outside of those meetings. So we wanted to create a tool that would essentially help you see the project from the big picture, have the specific details when you need it, and then we are able to ask you your thoughts, at certain sort of key stops along the way, especially when data and modeling projections have been generated, for example. So we've created this Google workbook, and Ariel will be able to email you the link essentially to it so that you all have it, but I'll just sort of walk you through a bit of the contents today. And note that, of course, it's dynamic, so it's going to expand as our process sort of continues, but there's a starting point to help familiarize you with and remind you of what we've done so far and where we are sort of currently in the process. And then if you have a sort of summary outline view, see on the left-hand side of the document here, these headings sort of help you jump to particular parts of the workbook as well to sort of make navigation easier. If you scroll down past the title page, there's also contents that I'll keep updated as we add sections to the workbook too, and you can also click on them and it'll take you right to that part of the document. Right now it's at about 12 pages, but I imagine it'll get longer as we continue on. The first section we have here is about this workbook. So again, a general overview about the purpose of this particular engagement tool and what it is that we're looking for. And just a sort of reminder that it's not static, it's a living, evolving tool. We encourage you to use it and ask us questions, sort of in it if you'd like as well. But as I mentioned, as we progress through each stage of the climate action plan, it's going to be continuously updated with the latest information, key findings, and specific requests for your feedback. And so when we have a specific request for feedback, Ariel will email you with that and the link again to the workbook. You can keep the link yourself, but just in case it sort of gets lost in the myriad of digital documents you probably already access, we'll make sure that you always have access to that. What we'll be doing is probably giving you a link to a short survey. So you'll be able to sort of read the update in the workbook and be able to give us feedback via the survey, which is similar to, it'll be the same one as like you had answered sort of before in the pre-engagement phase of the project. So please take a look at that. That'll help get you oriented. Just got some context and background information, a list of everybody who's on the RSAC here as well. And then after each meeting, I'll update this with either the what we talked about, sort of the topics will be on our first presentation. There's a link to the presentation that I gave you that sort of outlines the process. This meeting, we're just going to be talking about the workbook. And as we go through the next meetings, I'll link back to any materials, of course, that we share with you in this meeting and any outcomes of the discussion. When there comes a time where you make project recommendations, we'll also be listing them, sort of here for discussion and finalization as appropriate and as necessary. There's project background information for you here. So this was what was given out in pre-engagement as well. Just again, overview of the process, the technical and the engagement side of things, the project's decision statement, the key outputs, of course, that this project will enable, and then the specific deliverables and givens. So from our last presentation, we talked about givens being the things that are sort of immovable or not, things that we're not sort of engaging on, and things like the project itself is going to take us until April 2024, for example. We're going to make sure that there's a low carbon, sort of scenario and action strategies. We're going to be collaborating with you. We've recommended, and I've formed a staff expert climate advisory team as well to give Ariel and our project team also like sort of another sort of forum to talk about specific things like modeling assumptions and other technical aspects, of course, of the project. We'll be collaborating with the general public, as you know, as well. And of course, the big final output will be the climate action plan itself and implementation plan as recommended to the county council. Project glossary, this can be type of project that has a lot of acronyms, to it. One piece of feedback we got from the webinar that we held last week was, use fewer acronyms. And so we'll work, of course, to do that. And then there's some aspects of acronyms that are sort of unavoidable in this sector, if you will. So we've got a project glossary. And as I've noted in here, of course, this will grow. And if I end up using an acronym and I forget to spell it out, please don't hesitate to let me know that. And or if you want one, sort of included or a term defined in here, please just let us know and we'll be happy to do that and include that in here as needed. The next section is about the project's active public engagement. So as I mentioned, last week we held a Climate Action Planning 101 webinar. If you couldn't make it, no, not to worry. It's the recording is here. So right in the workbook itself, there's the link right to the YouTube of the presentation. So you're welcome to watch that if you wish. And if you want to take a look at the survey results, they're here as well. After each public engagement, we'll be running a survey evaluation so that we also know that are we hitting the mark with respect to what we wanted to do, and we get sort of tips about how to make things better moving forward. And we do a bit of a spot check. So on this one, I'm quite happy. We had some really good results with respect to, I'll just show you quickly what the results were there of the folks that filled it out. My first sort of questions are, did you feel you better understand the approach? And we've got either 75% of respondents strongly agreeing and 25% agreeing. The second question we ask is, I feel that this session was well facilitated, and 100% of the people who filled it out strongly agreed with that. And there was enough information presented for me to participate effectively. And again, 100% of people who responded said they strongly, essentially agreed to that. So those spot checks sort of help us, too, as the project planning team, make sure that we're hitting the mark with our public engagement events. And approximately 30 people participated in the live event. So recordings here, the recording's also on the project website too, for anyone who would like to see at any point how the whole process comes together. The future events are listed here. So as details will be shared here as they become available, we're planning most of the active engagement for the fall when we've seen more of the modeling results and essentially can go out and speak to people about different aspects of them and receive their feedback, including yourselves. And so we'll continue to summarize that for you too, the opportunity. And then what were the results, essentially, not just of the survey, but what also were the results of the discussion and what will get incorporated, of course, into the plan. So that helps you keep the big picture view with specific enough details. On the technical engagement side of things, the CCAT is the name of the group that I mentioned that we've also formed as well. So their first meeting is going to take place in July, and they'll be reviewing the project process and the initial business as usual and business as planned projections from the modeling. So we're right in that phase right now where those projections are being generated. It takes about 120 hours or so to go from model calibration to the first set of projections. And I'll talk about model calibration in just a moment. We presented at the workshop last week too, the draft base year projection. So while the business as usual model projection is happening, so that's taking a look at what are happening with emissions now from this base year and projecting them out into 2050 under two scenarios. One, if we just did nothing, and then the BAP is business as planned as we take into account the current policies and actions that are already taking place in the county out to 2050 as well. So you'll get a look at those at your next meeting as well. And if you pop into the workbook before then, we'll be putting those results in as we get them for the CCAT, so you can have a sneak preview of them if you wish. So model calibration is simply how do we take what's happening essentially in your county and simplify it to represent it as a system. And then what we want to do is confirm, like to calibrate is, are the results that we're getting also in line with what we would expect to see, sort of essentially in the real world. So there's an explanation of model calibration there that I've made as short as possible and hopefully no technical jargon, but you can tell me, you can evaluate that and let me know what you think or if you need further clarifications. But the output was a very draft base year for Charleston County, and sort of showing that the above graph here illustrates that the county's emissions by fuel source. So what fuels essentially are being burned that are leading to the emissions across the county itself, is that it's from imported electricity used primarily for space conditioning, and it's the largest source of emissions. And the fuels from various transportation activities also have a large impact, which is not sort of unexpected, essentially, when you take a look at what drives most emissions across the United States. And then we've also sort of divided it out here, breaking down emissions by sector. And so what you see from this graph, again, is transportation as a sector is a large source of emissions, and the buildings together, residential and industrial commercial buildings as well, account for sort of the big, sort of blocks. When I say that this is draft, is that we'll continue to refine this, of course, right now as the model is being further calibrated, but you wouldn't expect to see drastic changes in this distribution of either of these graphs. Essentially, it would be more like finer tweaks. So for example, it's not going to be the case that all of a sudden transportation is not a large source of emissions in the county, just to be the more accurate, as to exactly what they are. So the base year for this project will be 2020, and the timeframe will be 2020 to 2050 for any of the modeling projections essentially that we do. So then, as I mentioned, in the future, you'll be getting this section will get filled out with the business as usual and the business as planned model projection. I've got this sort of projected dates as well for these in there. LCS stands for low carbon scenario, which is also in the glossary. That's the Once we have the BAU and BAP and we understand the size of the challenge, of course, over the next few decades, we take a look at what does a low carbon intervention look like and how fast and how swift or what are the specifics around each of the actions that we need, where we need to reduce emissions to hit a low carbon target in the future are. And we're also, of course, as an output, is an implementation framework for the climate action plan. And we're working on that with our partners and subcontractors, civics. So once the framework is available, you'll see that in the fall too, and be able to give us feedback on that framework too. So hopefully we want this to be a collaborative and helpful tool that keeps you informed, that allows you to give us feedback when necessary, and hopefully isn't overly burdensome. This will probably be the biggest one sort of chunk of information that we give you just here at the start. And then each section will be filled out as that information becomes available. We also welcome RSEC member participation at any of the public engagement events that we have planned, as well, hopefully to see you there if you can come and you're interested. But we also welcome your feedback and the discussion and questions here at these meetings too. I think that's about it. Ariel, did I miss anything that you'd like me to go over?
I have a question. Since we meet quarterly, is there any need between now and our next meeting or after our next meeting, the following meeting, for us to, as a group, to get an update in between those meetings, or to allow you to stay on schedule, or can you stay on schedule with the way our meetings are presently scheduled?
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a great question. This would where the updates in between meetings would be taking place is inside of this document itself. So if there's a particular, once say the BAU and BAP become available, we'll update this workbook, and Ariel will be able to shoot you an email to let you know. But it's a live link that you can keep and sort of be looking at whatever you like. There's no, as soon as we give it to you now, it's yours essentially for the entire duration of the project and afterwards. So it'll be updated in real time. And so you'll be able to receive those updates, as they happen before our next meeting. So you don't need to wait essentially. And we might be asking you to take a look at something and give us some feedback before your next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What are, within the model, what are kind of the geographic limits for how it addresses local source emissions? Are we just containing it to the county, or do we consider what happens outside of the county?
Yeah, that's a great question. For the modeling purposes of this, it's scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and I can update the workbook with what that essentially means. So essentially, we're looking at source-based emissions and use within the county, geographic county itself, are the boundary set essentially for the model for that. Scope 3 emissions tend to deal with things like, what about cars that drive, from outside of the boundary, of the county itself, sort of what do we do about manufactured goods and the emissions associated with them that come into the county? And so we'll discuss things like that, the specifics of that sort of going forward, especially when we get the low carbon scenario modeling. But just so you know, in terms of the way we use the GPC protocol essentially for accounting for emissions, and that sets the geographic boundary just to the county itself, and then of course specific to the unincorporated areas.
Quick clarifying question. Are you concerned at all about 2020 being your base year, given the global pandemic and things might have been a little bit different in 2020 compared to other years?
Not really. I mean, that's a great question. Essentially, we just have factors that help us account for, that just like you would in a type of a survey when you do weighting, so that when we calibrate the model, essentially when we're taking a look at what happened in the real world and what's expected with population growth, for example, and other types of factors, we can account both for what was happening, especially in 2020, but feel confident that what we're projecting into the future is reliant on what we reasonably think would happen.
That's good, because just working on the city side, Charleston city side, just on transportation, the amount of miles in 2020 were drastically reduced from 2019 or 2021. Yeah. And we thought that at one point that there would be a greater increase in kilowatt hours in residential, and we found out that it really wasn't. And that had to do with people going out and buying all this efficient equipment and replacing their equipment. But transportation was obvious, as Scott mentioned, in 2020 in this area. Tremendous.
And one of the reasons that we did 2020, I mean, just from a convenience standpoint, is that I had previously done like 2018 and 2020 greenhouse gas inventory. So we had all the energy data already for all of the county and all the municipalities, which took probably 6 months to get from our utility provider. But because we wanted municipalities that weren't the counties, we had to get their permissions, and it was a really long process that we didn't really want to repeat for 2021 at this point to keep the project going. So that's another kind of reason we chose 2020. I was just gonna add, Naomi was talking about the upcoming engagement sessions. So because of course, they are not located in Charleston, those are gonna be webinars. But I do wanna be able to do outreach locally to groups that might not engage with a webinar or, feel comfortable with that, or for whatever reason, participate. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm newer to Charleston, on groups that we can engage with. And I think it would be more of a 101, not really technical, not asking them about modeling and things like that, but just explaining what we're doing, and we want their input. You guys, work in all different sectors. And so if you have any ideas, if you can just, and I'll send an email out about it, but in terms of who to engage with or where, whether it's like, senior centers, church, whatever ideas you guys have, I'm totally open to, because I definitely want to capture everyone and make sure that it's an inclusive process. So
Yeah, I was a little surprised it's only 30 at that session, the webinar session. I thought that might have been more, because that's a big group. That Sierra group is pretty large, isn't it?
It is.
yeah, I think we had a lot of people just that are going to watch the recording later. That's what a lot of feedback I got. So it's hard to know with webinar, what time works. Like some people really love the lunchtime thing. Some people like it after work, and you never get on everyone's schedule. So yeah, for that reason, I'm totally open to going to where people already are to do presentations and stuff. I just trying to figure out kind of like the best way to do that.
Well, the chamber would be a great place. We recently had some great sessions with the chamber as we were looking at the EV zoning ordinance for the city of Charleston.
Okay.
And they've been able to have meetings where they have a major meeting each month.
Okay.
And we were invited to that. That's a great place to start.
I'll talk to you more about
Yeah.
that.
That's exactly what I was gonna tell you. Awesome meeting.
Okay.
Right,
sounds good.
yeah, and Doug is not, Doug James, I think he gave up his position with the realtor or not, but that would be a great place to also go.
With the realtors or home builders?
With home builders.
Oh,
Home
okay.
builders.
Yeah.
Thank you. That would be also another great place to go. And then some of us, do you have an idea?
Oh, no.
No.
Well, what we do at the COG is a lot of piggyback events, so not presentations, but going out to pre-existing festivals, anything that already has some agglomeration of people, and then try to set up fun ways to interact with them, but to ask questions about underlying values. So not specific technical questions, but what you care about. If you presented with information, does this worry you? And especially if you want to talk about trade-offs or scenarios.
Okay.
You got the upcoming County Hazards Expo, right? Coming up. That would be a good
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Very good group of people who are engaged and interested.
Yep.
There are other avenues, just putting out information through some of the universities.
Okay.
colleges in the area.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And we're gonna do what we did last partner fair for our kickoff event. You guys are the first invite.
Okay.
So if you wanna think about ways to use that.
Yeah.
Let's get you a college audience.
Yeah, that would be great. I think because I've done green drinks a lot and things like that, but I definitely feel like we've hit like the environmental bubble of Charleston, but kind of want to go outside of that. And yeah, did you?
Yeah, and then for the county, it's so easy to hit like the urban areas, but
Yeah.
the rural areas.
Yeah, that's where-
It's gonna be the churches, like. there's
Okay,
Edisto,
That's what I was thinking too.
Ministerial Alliance.
What's it
groups
called?
It's like Edisto Ministerial Alliance. Is anybody familiar with that? It's
I've
like a
heard of
group-
it, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So they
I'll look
kind of
it up.
try to coordinate among their churches to get information like this out.
Okay.
That'll be your best bet.
Like maybe the Johns Island farmers markets, the outer ones that are not big city.
Yeah. Okay.
But probably most important is when we have an event, if you could email us that event in enough time so that we can then send it out to all the people that, or the groups that we participated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That would get out.
And for urban churches, yeah, like a running list of contact information.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's great. Navy, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts. And I think that's already sounding like a really great list too, for you to reach out to, Ariel. And I will, I'll update the workbook too with answers about, the differences in 2020 as the base year and how we account for them as well. So you'll have that in the workbook too.
Thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure. Nice to see you all again.
Can you
Okay.
make me the host again? Do you mind?
You bet.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Naomi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So you're
you.
gonna email us the link to that,
Yeah, I'll email you all the link to the workbook,
okay. So,
and we'll do the resilience presentation as well.
okay,
Yes, we'll send that together.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for anyone here? Do we have any public comment? Anybody online?
We do have some people online. I believe.
Yeah, they normally have to sign up.
Right.
We didn't receive any
Oh, okay.
sign outs for public comment.
All right.
Any other
think we're
comments from members of the committee?
Sorry.
Just
Shop, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good question. What our agenda will be for our September meeting. So I'm gonna assume that between now and then, Naomi's gonna be doing work and getting back to us. Will there be anything from planning that we would need to look at from a zoning point of view in September?
Well, there is something for the resilience side of the house. We're working on the vulnerability assessment that we had in our first meeting. It was an update from our consultant. So we will be pulling in this committee with that also. So we will be doing a presentation in September on that piece of it.
What might help is whatever we're doing on the climate action plan, if we can get that a week before our actual meeting.
Yeah.
Not that we don't want to listen to Naomi, but we do, but that way people can take a look at it so that we're more informed as a body when we get
Yeah,
back together.
that's no
Okay,
problem.
All right, anything else? We want to have a motion to adjourn? Scott, Kyle, seconds?
Sure.
All in favor? Have a go home.
Okay, so thanks everyone for attending
Great.
online. Gonna be
Thank
ending the
you. Thanks,
meeting. Thanks,
everyone.
Naomi.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great rest of your day. And hopefully it won't be a Monday on the